Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Friday everybody. Let's begin today's video with the economy and move through a few key developments. First up, global investors reduced their holdings of China bonds in the onshore market for a 9th month running in October. According to data from China Central and Depository Clearinghouse Co. Limited and Shanghai Clearinghouse, the amount of Chinese bonds held by foreign investors in the interbank market declined by 26.5 billion RMB, approximately $3.8 billion in October, seeing a 70.7 billion RMB drop in September. That is the month before. Total bond outflows in the first 10 months of this year has now reached 625 billion yuan. Stocks also saw a record withdrawal of funds in October, driven after the 20th Party Congress, and we remember the yuan depreciated to a 15-year low last month too, though both of these have somewhat reversed in November. The stock market in particular has been more optimistic over the last 10 days, with both zero COVID and property market easing signals from Beijing, combined with the flow-on effects of positive share movements in North America. Morgan Stanley last week cut its annual inflow estimate for China. It forecasts bond buying to resume at a slower pace, partly due to the policy cycle divergence. It now estimates that inflows may not resume until 2025. Of course, China's economy has had a tough year, with these recent moves to ease the two biggest risks facing the economy, COVID-0 and the property crisis. There is some reason now, however, to be optimistic for the medium-term outlook. Just how optimistic one should be, however, is being debated by economists currently. We have examined some of the more cautious voices in this debate in recent days, so for today, let's examine the more hopeful and bullish views. On Thursday, for example, Goldman Sachs told clients in a research note that GDP growth in China is likely to pick up in the second half of 2023 and into 2024 after the country moves past the fallout of zero COVID, assuming that China starts reopening in April. Morgan Stanley this week expressed that they see a post-zero COVID growth surge in consumption, which they say will support a revival in healthy growth. In the meantime, they and other more optimistic analysts argue fiscal policy is likely to pick up the growth slack. That is to say, debt-fueled infrastructure spending will bridge the gap. And this week too, ANZ Bank raised its 2023 growth forecast to above 5%. Goldman Sachs predicts 5.3%, but not until 2024. Quote, "The last few days have brought some unexpected good news. The outlook for 2023 is a little brighter than it appeared a few days ago." End quote. All three of these optimistic outlooks assume the property crisis is not further mismanaged and that zero COVID is rolled back in the following months, which brings us to the next part of today's video. So let's briefly update the outbreak situation in China. Cases continue to rise, but so far there are no signs of a move away from rebalancing policy made with last week's 20 measures. Indeed, despite surging cases, 6 cities, including Shanghai and Sanya, have scrapped mass testing, quote, in an effort to implement the new measures, end quote, according to state-run Global Times. Yesterday, new official daily cases breached 25,000. Guangzhou continues to be the city of greatest concern. Quote, officials were still discussing the need to lock down the city last week as the number of infected people was rising so rapidly that it was causing the government to panic. Guangzhou's current control approach is like an experiment, concentrating only on areas where the number of infections continues to rise and maintaining normal order in other areas. End quote. Yesterday, the city announced plans to build quarantine facilities for nearly 250,000 people. China's sensitive capital is also of concern. The Beijing Center for Disease Prevention and Control announced at a press briefing yesterday, Thursday, that dozens of community cases are being discovered daily, calling the situation, quote, grim and complex, end quote. Meanwhile, also at a Thursday conference, a senior official from the National Health Commission said that establishing intensive care units, ICU, should be enhanced, noting that ICU beds will be required to account for 10% of the total number of hospital beds. She also said building of makeshift hospitals should be strengthened for the treatment of patients with mild symptoms and silent carriers. This suggests that we should not expect some short-term rapid rollback anytime soon. Next up, it's been a big week for General Secretary Xi Jinping. Hey guys, if you like what I try and do here on China Update and you'd like to help me keep it sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. It's just me who makes China Update, and this channel relies primarily on subscriber support, so this is a tremendous help. If you're enjoying today's video in particular, don't forget to hit that like button. As always, thank you so much everybody for the ongoing support. Okay, lastly for today's video, after 3 years of very limited face-to-face interactions with world leaders, Xi Jinping has had an eventful week. The General Secretary was in Bali for the G20, where he had a 3-hour meeting with Biden on Monday, as well as face-to-face interactions with many world leaders, including, as we will soon see, an awkward and much-watched dressing down of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He has now arrived in Bangkok for APEC. Trade, technology, Taiwan, Ukraine, cooperation, competition, the digital economy, and the changing world order were all themes discussed in Xi's many meetings this week. French President Macron announced plans to visit Beijing and expressed hope that China can be involved in de-escalating the Ukraine war. Though on this point we should note that this week, People's Republic of China Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with his Russian counterpart to stress that China is, quote, ready to work with Russia and other like-minded countries to advance multipolarity in the world, firmly support greater democracy in international relations, and firmly defend the international system with the United Nations at its core, end quote. New Italian Prime Minister Meloni, after a Wednesday meeting with Xi, announced similar plans to visit Beijing. There were also meetings with the Spanish and Netherlands leaders. Some analysts believe that Beijing is employing a so-called divide-and-rule approach to its interactions with the EU, pointing out the tactic of courting specific EU countries and their national interests, quote, often used to destabilize Brussels, end quote, in the words of one analyst. Meanwhile, the People's Republic of China and the Republic of Indonesia signed, in the words of state media, quote, a cooperation plan regarding the Belt and Road Initiative, covering such areas as the economy and trade, digital economy, vocational training, and medicinal plants, end quote. Xi Jinping met with Australia's Prime Minister too and expressed a desire for better relations. However, the bilateral relationship remains complex, with very little real appetite from either side for warming outside of the trade spheres. We will be discussing UK-China matters in more detail in tomorrow's video. Yesterday in Bangkok, Xi also met with Japanese Prime Minister Kishida, who earlier this week also met with Chinese Premier Li Keqiang. Based on the Chinese readout of the meeting, Xi decided to focus on the economic and trade dimensions of the relationship between the world's number 2 and number 3 economies, expressing, quote, the two countries need to step up dialogue and cooperation in such areas as digital economy, green development, fiscal and financial sectors, healthcare and old age care, and in keeping the industrial and supply chain stable and unclogged, so as to realize complementary and mutual benefits at a higher level, end quote. After the meeting, Kishida told reporters he had emphasized the importance of peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. He declined to go into specifics, however, regarding what Xi had said to him, saying that it would be against protocol. And speaking of protocol, on Wednesday afternoon local time, as the G20 summit was wrapping up, an unhappy-looking Xi confronted Canada's Justin Trudeau in an exchange which has gone viral online. Xi expressed through a translator, quote, everything we said has been leaked to the papers, and that's not appropriate, end quote, adding, quote, if you are sincere, we should communicate with each other in a respectful manner, end quote. Trudeau responded with, quote, in Canada we believe in a free and open and frank dialogue, end quote, and expressed hopes for constructive dialogue. After the short exchange between translators, Xi smiles, shakes the leader's hand before walking off. However, in the video, as she walks off camera, he can be heard saying, 很天真, so naive. Shortly after the exchange, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson expressed that the interaction, quote, should not be interpreted as she criticizing or accusing anyone, end quote. Meanwhile, speaking to Singapore's Prime Minister in Bangkok, she expressed that China will work with Singapore to, quote, uphold solidarity and cooperation in the region, oppose group politics, resist bloc confrontation, keep to the right direction of economic and regional integration, and firmly reject the attempts to push for decoupling and severing supply chains, or to build a small yard with high fences, end quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. I will see you all tomorrow.